to the referendums in relation to water and so on, any amount of issues. This particular one upsets me on every level, personally and professionally, because you have utterly failed to learn. This was the chance to learn to do the scheme right. You messed up with Caranua, you messed up with the Magdalene Redress Scheme, which the High Court judge said was maladministered, and you're doing the exact same all over again. You have, I can't remember how many pages in the application form, and you're insisting, for example, that people have photo ID, and when they ring up to ask about that, they say there's no way out. Even on that little issue, there's no humanity, no flexibility. You talk about a waiver. Nowhere is it explained or included in the application form what the waiver means. Now, 10 years later, with all that experience, it is simply unforgivable that you would persist today with a scheme that's unjust and unfair when you have the opportunity to correct that. You're in negotiations with the religious orders. Perhaps you might give an update on that and confirm that when you have that completed, that money will be used to have a scheme that's inclusive of all and based on fairness and justice.
Issue, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy. The Mother and Baby Homes Institution Payment Scheme opened for applications at 9 a.m. this morning. It has taken far too long, but I am now glad that the scheme is up and running. An extensive information awareness campaign will take place both at home and abroad, and applicants will be supported throughout the application process with the information and advice that they need. Where a person doesn't have photo identification, this will be dealt with empathetically and on a case-by-case basis. We should not forget that redress isn't just about financial compensation, it's about other things, like medical cards, like, for example, access to birth information, which is so important to people. And 10,000 people have already got information through the birth information and tracing service, which many people in this House opposed. And of course, work is now continuing in relation to Tuam in particular to carry out exhumations there and to make sure that those children get a Christian and appropriate burial. And work is advanced too on the Records Memorial Centre in Sean McDermott Street, which I think is going to be extremely important too. The scheme itself is for 34,000 people who spent time in mother, baby and county home institutions. It's projected to cost €800 million, so it is the largest scheme of its size. And I don't believe it's restricted on that basis. And it did go farther than was recommended either by the Commission of Investigation or the interdepartmental group which followed. In terms of negotiations with the religious orders, the government believes that all parties have a collective responsibility to respond to the legacy of these institutions. Last May, Government approved a proposal from Minister Gorman to appoint Sheila Noonan to act on his behalf in leading negotiations with relevant religious bodies with the view to securing a financial contribution towards the payment scheme. And once those negotiations are over, a full report will be provided to Government and will then be able to decide what to do with the money, depending on how much there is.
He should announce he's going to resign, that you might depart from your written script with an issue of such importance. 34 practising clinicians wrote to the Minister and pointed out that the 6 months was arbitrary and unacceptable. Working in the area of childhood trauma, they pointed out that the impact of early trauma has nothing to do or does not rest solely on duration within an institution. Childhood trauma includes separation from primary caregivers, has the greatest impact, and so on. That letter was sent to the Minister, utterly ignored. I've stood up here tongue-in-cheek, but actually serious, saying to Deputy Sherlock, with his baby, he wasted 6 months getting up at night time because, according to your scheme and the Minister's scheme, the first 6 months are a tabula rasa. We simply waste our time mothering our babies for 6 months because it doesn't matter. Allow them scream, roar. That's what your scheme is saying. In addition, you're excluding so many people, those who have been boarded out, those who suffered from abuse because of their race, and so on. And you stand here today and preside over that. An intelligent government would learn from their mistakes. And we've had any amount of opportunities to learn from our mistakes. And bearing in mind what your previous Taoiseach outlined, Enda Kenny, you might today, in your parting words, say, this scheme is unjust. It's a start, but it needs to be changed. And we will clearly look at the report from Sheila Noonan to use that money to make the scheme inclusive.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to conclude, please.
Thanks, Deputy. Just to reiterate that redress comes in many different forms, and financial compensation is only one element of that. There are more aspects to it than this. The overwhelming priority and need which has been expressed through extensive engagement with survivors is access to records, information about their birth and their early lives. And about 10,000 people have already received that information, with more to come, and I'm glad that that's been possible. In relation to the engagement with religious orders, when we come to an agreement with them, should that be possible, it'll then be up to the government at the time to make a decision as to how that money can best be spent. When it comes to the medical cards, the legislation underpinning the scheme provides that anyone who spent 180 days or more in one of these institutions is eligible for health supports in the form of an enhanced medical card, and we're keen to press ahead with that without any unnecessary delay.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. That concludes Leaders' questions for today. Just before moving to the order of business, Taoiseach has asked that we acknowledge the passing last week of the late Charlie Bird. Taoiseach.
Thanks, Concord. I just want to take this brief opportunity to allow us to recall and recognise the life of Charlie Bird. I think somebody who pretty much everyone in this House knew from his professional life, an extraordinary and animated journalist who really brought stories to life, in my view, and then also somebody who in his later years I think showed enormous courage and enormous bravery in the campaigns which he led. And he's going to be sorely missed, I think, by all of us here in this House, by his colleagues in the media and RTE, and I just wanted us to take the opportunity to recognise that.
Deputy Mayor Liam O'Connor.
Margaret Cian Corla, and I too want to join in recognising the legend that was Charlie Bird. For 4 decades, his voice was to be heard across the most important news stories of our time. His incredible, heartbreaking work on the Stardust tragedy is, I think, a standout from that very long career. He will always be remembered for his role, of course, in covering the emerging Irish peace process, including as the RTE contact person for the IRA in those years. I want to pay a particular tribute to Charlie for the courage and the humanity that he demonstrated when diagnosed with motor neuron disease. I think his selfless campaign, his charity work, his bravery and his resilience were truly inspirational for all of us, and indeed I would go so far as to say lifted the spirits of the country. So he will be remembered not just by all of us but by everybody for his incredible personality, his impactful reporting, his bravery in the face of very serious illness, for his decency, his good humour, and in the end there was only one Charlie Bird. So I want to express, for my part and ours, our deepest condolences, that of Sinn Féin's, to Charlie's wife Claire, to his daughters Orla and Nasa, his very wide circle of family and friends, and of course to all of Charlie's former journalistic colleagues. Yeshje Gorev a Anam Deilish.
Raymond Ryan, then.
Can Corl, I'm very glad on behalf of the Green Party to give our fond memories and regards to all the family, Charlie's family. And I was thinking, just on a day like today, this is where Charlie Bird would be at his best. He was the most dogged, intrepid reporter. If he didn't have the story first, he'd want the right question next. He was incredible, determined and brilliant journalist, and he'll be remembered very fondly for the Irish people for that work he did, but also for his honesty. I remember watching that programme, following him in Washington as a foreign correspondent, and all the challenges and travails that applied then, but also more than anything else in the way he managed his illness in recent years. I absolutely join with my colleagues in praying for his soul, and may he rest in peace now.
I want to join with others in paying tribute to the late Charlie Bird on behalf of the Labour Party. And indeed, he was a journalist of immense tenacity, of courage, of conviction. We all recall his incredible work on the Stardust tragedy, but of course also his inspirational courage in facing down motor neuron disease, his activism. And of course, he was at one point a Labour member, and we remember him very fondly within the party. But he was hugely active on the marriage equality campaign more recently as an advocate on motor neuron disease, teaching all of us so much more about that awful condition. His climb of Croagh Patrick, his spirit even in his final years, and I think we all recall that so fondly. And I just want to pay my own deepest condolences to Claire, to his partner Claire, to Orla and Nessa, his daughters, to his family, and of course to Tiger, his dog, who played a leading role in the memorial service that Aodhán Riordan and I were proud to attend last week in the Mansion House. So, Arieste go raibh anam dílis.
Margaret Ciancorla, I just want to join with other deputies and on behalf of the Social Democrats in remembering Charlie Bird. He was a true journalist. Even in maybe the most difficult time for him, he was still raising awareness, still informing the public, and on such an important issue of NMD. And our thoughts are with his family, his friends, and his former colleagues.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, I'd like to join everyone else in paying tribute to Charlie Bird and expressing, on behalf of People Before Profit, our condolences and sympathies to his wife and all of his family. As has already been mentioned, I think one group of people who will always be grateful to Charlie Bird are the families, the Stardust families, for his relentless commitment to their campaign for justice. And I'm sure as they await the outcome of the current inquest, they will be deeply grateful for the support that Charlie Bird gave them. I think it is also maybe worth mentioning that he was a socialist, a left-winger when he was younger, and I would like to think that that tenacity that he had as a journalist owed something maybe to his left-wing origins. I think he also inspired us incredibly with his bravery in the face of the motor neuron disease, and that can only have been an incredibly difficult time for him and all of his family. But lastly, I would just like to say that, you know, given the iconic figure he was as a journalist and the universal respect he had as a journalist with the public, with his fellow colleagues, it's maybe a moment to consider just how important public service broadcasting is at a time when it's somewhat in peril, that we remember just how he personified the best of what public service broadcasting is. So I pass on my deepest sympathies on our behalf to his family. He will be greatly missed, I think, by us all.
Sean Kenny.
And just on behalf of the regional group, I too want to extend our sympathies to Charlie's family. And I suppose the most thing for us that stands out is the fact that he was so courageous when he was struck down with ill health, and the spirit by which he took that on, and was an example to us all to take on whatever life gives us. And we just want to wish his family well into the future. He will be missed, and may he rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Norma Foley.
Thank you very much, Ciancorla. On behalf of the Fianna Fáil Party, I would also like to join in the words of sympathy to the family of Charlie Bird, to his wife Claire, to his daughters. He was an enormous presence, I think, in all of our lives, particularly growing up. He was just a permanent figure in RTE. He was a journalist that could turn up anywhere, right around the world, both domestically and internationally. He was a man we associated with the pursuit of justice and the pursuit of integrity. He had a very long and distinguished career in journalism, but more than that, I think we remember him for, and people have referenced his association with the Stardust, and so many other causes could be identified with him so very clearly. They were the issues that mattered to real people on the ground, in the sense of, you know, the need for justice. But equally so, and reference has been made to, you know, his final years and his illness with motor neuron, and his choice to go public with that, and to be a voice for those who didn't have a voice, and to explain it more clearly to the general public, to raise funds for it, to make it an accessible and understandable challenge that he was facing. And the work that he did there was just quite incredible, really, in that he allowed the humanity of his experience to be shared with the world. And he often spoke of being a man who was, you know, very quick to tears, and I think he made it very acceptable in our world that there is an honour and integrity in showing your humanity and showing your heart, and indeed in showing your tears. There's a place for that in the world too. He was generous with his time. He was generous with his time, particularly in his final days. We will remember him with gratitude and affection.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Matty McGrath.
On behalf of the Rural Independent Group, I too would like to express our sympathies to his wife, and indeed his daughters and his family and his journalistic colleagues and that family also. And he did state some service, to quote somebody else, the former Taoiseach, and indeed, obviously, his work as a journalist at the time of the peace process was very pivotal as well, and very important. There was someone like him that could be the receiving end for the situation that was developing there, a very serious, delicate situation. And also his Oberstar role son in Stardust, and clowning in Stardust, the families of the Stardust, he did tremendous advocate there. And I suppose he's gone to his happy reward now, thinking that, at least knowing that there's a tribunal and an investigation going on, and we hope that they'll finally get justice. I think that his journalistic colleagues could learn a lot from him today, because I'm sure the news that started to emanate this morning around 10 o'clock, if Charlie Bird was here, we'd have it last night by midnight, or maybe this morning very early, because he had a very, very great tenacity and a way of finding out the news. So I think maybe we miss him, because that news would have been definitely out this morning, and everybody would have known about it sooner. But look, as all I say, on our own behalf, our own group, to wish him eternal peace, and is with us in our thoughts and prayers. Yes, Dail, go around.
You weren't too slow in picking up the news yourself, Deputy.
No.
Deputy Thomas Pringle.
Yeah, look, thanks very much. Just on behalf of the Independent Group, I would like to just express our condolences to Charlie Bird's family, and to recognise the work that he did over the years, and as has been mentioned by other members in relation to the Stardust families and the ceasefires in the north, is very important, and it's very well recognised. And I think also, as well as Deputy Bard has said, in recognition of public service broadcasting too, I think that's vitally important and should be remembered at the current time as well. So on behalf of the group, I would just like to express sympathy to his families and memories. Thank you.
There is no doubt that this is a man who over 40 years touched the lives of all of us and informed us about so many important events. The Stardust, the earth-shattering nature of that, the end of apartheid in South Africa, ongoing news of our own peace processes, the Twin Towers attacks, will we ever forget those, and the 2004 Indonesian tsunami. But as members have said, and as I think Mr. Foley has touched on, he touched the lives of people suffering with that dreadful condition, motor neuron disease, to give them courage and to give them hope. And in his practical endeavours, by raising over 3 million for research into that disease, for the Motor Neuron Disease Association and for Pieta House, he has given really practical assistance in a way that I think will have lasting effect. So I join with you in extending deepest sympathies to Claire and his daughters Orla and Nessa. Yeshde Garev Anam. Can we stand for a minute, please? May Charlie rest in peace. And as we sit and we remember that one of our former esteemed colleagues, Emmett Stagg, passed away at the weekend, and I'm sure everyone here joins with me in extending to his wife Mary, his daughter Gillian and his son Henry our deepest condolences and sympathies on his untimely passing. We move now to the order of business, and I call on the Government Chief Whip, Minister Hildegard Naughton, to move that the arrangements for the week's business be agreed to.
I move.
Are the proposed arrangements agreed to? Not agreed. Deputy Park McLaughlin.
Can Corler, the scenes of asylum seekers being moved from tents on Mount Street to tents on the Dublin mountains in recent days, everybody has to agree was absolutely appalling. It's the latest chapter in this absolute shambles the government have made of international protection, be it the disrespect for local communities, the lack of engagement, consultation all across the state, the enrichment of a small number of property owners because of the way that you've utterly failed, abject failure in this whole area. So we need Minister Roderick O'Gorman, who's been abandoned by all of his cabinet colleagues, to come in to this chamber and account for what happened and to lay out a plan, and maybe his cabinet colleagues would be as kind to join him and lay out a collective plan for government about how you're going to deal with this challenge and how you're going to respect communities and respect asylum seekers together.
First, just to thank you for acknowledging the sad passing of our dear friend and comrade Emmett Stagg, and on behalf of Labour, just again to extend my condolences to Mary, Gillian and Henry, and to all Emmett's family and friends. Taoiseach, with your surprise announcement today, and I've wished you well personally already, but I would say this, that it's impossible to suggest that the government can simply continue, pretend to continue that, on the basis that this is business as normal. With your surprise announcement today, you've destabilised the government. And what we've now seen unfolding, apparently, is Fine Gael deciding that they will get to pick what will be a third rotating Taoiseach in 4 years, with less than a year to run in the term of this government. And that's simply not on. So, Taoiseach, what I'm calling upon you to do is to pay a visit to the Áras, to call a general election, because it's the people of Ireland, not members of Fine Gael, who should now decide who's going to lead our country through this unprecedented set of crises and challenges, not least the housing disaster with over 4,000 children now homeless. So we're calling on you, Taoiseach, to call a general election, because this country needs a change of government, not just a change of Fine Gael.
Taoiseach, in advance of the European Council meeting, and in light of the fact that innocent civilians are now not just being killed by bombs indiscriminately dropping on people in Gaza, but also by an impending famine, I think we need statements to discuss what your approach will be at the European Council meeting, and also what Ireland can do independently of Europe as an independent state to use every single lever available to us to try and prevent any other further suffering in Gaza.
Taoiseach, this is no way to run a country. The position of Taoiseach has been passed around by our government like snuff at a wake. Highly paid ministers don't know what's happening from one day to the next. And the administration of this country clearly now is in a state of instability and chaos. We've had 10 Fine Gael TDs vote with their feet, a lack of confidence in the future of this government, and now we have the Taoiseach doing the same. And I think the referendum showed the absolute deficit that exists in this country between the people and the political bubble here in Leinster House. We can't have a situation where we have a Taoiseach who is rejected by the people being replaced by another Taoiseach who is unelected by the people. There must be an election now, and at the very least this chamber must debate the chaos in which has been created by your decision today.
Deputy McBarry.
There needs to be a general election now. Several parties have called for it in the House today, and I strongly suspect that there are many, many people out there in the society who will say, yes, it's time for that now. The new Taoiseach should be chosen. The people should have the decisive say in who the next Taoiseach is, not the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party. This has been a good Taoiseach. He's been a good Taoiseach for the wealthy. He's been a good Taoiseach for the upper echelons of the middle class, but not for working people and not for the poor. And I think the legacy will be a housing crisis which went from bad to worse, and a health crisis which is worsening as well. We need a change of government, a government that will act in the interests of working people and the poor at the expense of the wealthy who've benefited so massively under this government, and we need a debate about the need for a general election in this House this week.
Deputy Matthew McGrath.
Taoiseach, I wish you well and good health. But Count Cole, I had written to you last week looking for a debate here on the results of the referendum. The fact that you recklessly wasted 23 million, probably plus twice that, on a referendum campaign supported by all political parties here except for smaller parties. And we in the Rural Independents opposed that because the wording was nonsensical and it didn't mean sense. And you hid the truth. You all hid the truth collectively from the electorate. The people have spoken now. The first chance they got to give you a comment on you since you cobbled your government together. So it's time for you to go, and go with haste. And as I said, no ill will towards yourself. The fact that you'll pass around now, and you have an executive meeting tonight, I've seen as dispatched there, to pick who be Taoiseach. That is completely unacceptable. You have lost the faith of the people overwhelmingly in every part of the country except barely by the skin of someone's teeth in Dublin South, I think, or Dunleary. Every place else are fed up of your antics. You, Minister Coveney, were banding around extra money for the carers as if it's confetti at a wedding. They gave you your answer. So it's time to pack your bags and go off. So we need an immediate debate here, Count Cola, on the results of the referendum, with all parties and classes supported it.
Thank you. Deputy Pringle.
Taoiseach, just in light of the fact that we're going to rise tomorrow for 2 weeks now, I think it's vitally important that we debate the situation in Gaza because there's going to be thousands and thousands of more people are dead, unfortunately, by the time we come back. And I think we need to do that. We need to take an independent stance in relation to that as well, and that has to happen.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Just wanted to take this opportunity as well to note the passing of former colleague Emmett Stagg, somebody I would have worked with when he was Deputy Chief Whip in the 2011 to 2016 period, and somebody who was very much a fine man and did a lot to make sure that that government stayed together and got votes across the line, and want to extend my condolences to his family and party and supporters and friends. In relation to the issue of asylum seekers, we have private members down about that this week, so there's an opportunity to discuss it there. My understanding is that right now there are over 100 international protection applicants in Crooksling where they've access to toilets and showers, regular meals and other services, and also access to healthcare services too. Those are the services that are available until something more permanent can be found. Just once again to reassure the House that government business scheduled for this week will continue as it should. European Council happens tomorrow and I'll attend it. Work goes on. And we will discuss Gaza, and we'll be discussing European Council statements this afternoon, which is an opportunity for people to talk about that, in particular if they so wish. Once again, to restate that the Constitution is clear as to how our system works. The President is directly elected, the Taoiseach is elected by the Dáil is elected by the people, and there will be an opportunity for a debate on the election of the Taoiseach government in early course. On the referendum, the results are clear. The people have spoken. The government accepts and respects the outcome of the referendum. And I don't ever think that spending money on democracy, whether it's a referendum or whether it's an election for the Seanad or the Dáil or the European Parliament, is ever wasting money, even if you don't get the result that you want.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Now putting the question. The question is that the order of business for the week be agreed to.
Not agreed.
The Choctaw Haven Tarish Canarbadish Thaw. In a Gunna Neil. Stolen Gulling Cash Straight, you believe the question is carried. Vote all.
Cuairsaíoch na hógáil mar se de heile. The question is that the proposed arrangements for the week's business be agreed to, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw na Chachti Hildegard Naughton agus Cormac Devlin, Neil na Chachti Matthew McGrath agus Karen Nolan. On the question that the proposed arrangements for this week's business be agreed to, thorough result, Tá Shaskani, yes 69, Neil Shaskado, Sheelam Gawil and Checht Richa.
As such an important issue, the people, as I said, have spoken last week overwhelmingly against all parties. I believe that I'm demanding a vote other than to.
Okay. As the deputy is a teller and the difference in the votes is 10 or less, the division will proceed and the clerk will now ring the bells. proposal on the order of business. The question is that the proposed arrangements for the week's business be agreed to, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw na Chocty, Hildegard Naughton, agus Cormac Devlin, Neil na Chocty, Matty McGrath, agus Carl Nolan, and the division will now be taken by roll call.
Minister James Brown. Minister Mary Butler. Minister Thomas Byrne. Deputy Jackie Cahill. Minister Dara Calleary. Minister Jack Chambers. Minister Niall Collins. Deputy Barry Cowan. Deputy Cathal Crowe. Deputy Cormac Devlin. Minister Stephen Donnelly. Deputy Joe Flaherty. Minister Sean Fleming. Minister Norma Foley. Deputy Sean Haughey. Deputy Sean Haughey. Deputy John Lahart. Deputy James Lawless. An Taoiseach. Deputy Paul McAuliffe. Minister Charlie McConalogue. Minister Michael McGrath. Deputy John McGuinness. Deputy Andreas Moynihan. Deputy Michael Moynihan. Deputy Jennifer Monan O'Connor. Deputy Eamon O'Keefe. Minister Dara O'Brien. Deputy Jim O'Callaghan. Deputy James O'Connor. Deputy Willie O'Dea. Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan. Deputy Pádraig O'Sullivan. Minister Anne Rabbitte. Deputy Brendan Smith. Deputy Niamh Smith. Deputy Robert Troy. Deputy Colin Brophy. Deputy Richard Bruton. Deputy Colin Burke. Minister Peter Burke. Deputy Kieran Cannon. Deputy Joe Carey. Minister Jennifer Carroll McNeill. Minister Simon Coveney. Deputy Michael Creed. Deputy Alan Dillon. Minister Pascal Donoghue. Deputy Bernard Durkin. Deputy Damien English. Deputy Alan Farrell. Deputy Frankie Feehan. Deputy Charles Flanagan. Deputy Brendan Griffin. Minister Simon Harris. Minister Martin Hayden. Deputy Emer Higgins. Minister Heather Humphreys. Deputy Paul Keogh. Minister Josepha Madigan. Minister Helen McEntee. Deputy Joe McHugh. Minister Hildegard Naughton. Minister Kieran O'Donnell. Minister Patrick O'Donovan. Deputy Fergus O'Dowd. Deputy John Paul Phelan. Minister Neil Richmond. Deputy Michael Ring. Deputy David Stanton. An Taoiseach. Deputy Patrick Costello. Deputy Francis Noel Duffy. Deputy Nessa Horrigan. Deputy Brian Ledden. Minister Catherine Martin. Deputy Stephen Matthews. Minister Malcolm Noonan. Deputy Mark O'Cahasick. Minister Joe O'Brien. Minister Roderick O'Gorman. Minister Eamon Ryan. Minister Oisin Smith. Deputy Chris Andrews. Deputy John Brady. Deputy Martin Brown. Deputy Pat Buckley. Deputy Matt Carthy. Deputy Circa Clark. Deputy Rose Conway Walsh. Deputy Rada Cronin. Deputy Sean Crowe. Deputy David Cullinan. Deputy Pa Daly. Deputy Pearse Doherty. Deputy Paul Donnelly. Deputy Desi Ellis. Deputy Mairead Farrell. Deputy Kathleen Funchion. Deputy Thomas Gould. Deputy Johnny Quirk. Deputy Martin Kenny. Deputy Claire Curran. Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald. Deputy Denise Mitchell. Deputy Imelda Munster. Deputy Johnny Mythen. Deputy Owen O'Brien. Deputy Donnacha O'Leary. Deputy Rory O'Murcu. Deputy Angus O'Snuddick. Deputy Louise O'Reilly. Deputy Darren O'Rourke. Deputy Maurice Quinlivan. Deputy Patricia Ryan. Deputy Brian Stanley. Deputy Pauline Tully. Deputy Mark Ward. Deputy Ivana Bacik. Deputy Brenton Howland. Deputy Alan Kelly. Deputy Jed Nash. Deputy Aon O'Riordan. Deputy Sean Sherlock. Deputy Duncan Smith. Deputy Holly Kearns. Deputy Gary Gannon. Deputy Catherine Murphy. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan. Deputy Roisin Shortall. Deputy Jennifer Whitmore. Deputy Mick Barry. Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett. Deputy Gino Kenny. Deputy Paul Murphy. Deputy Braid Smith. Deputy Carl Berry. Deputy Sean Canny. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick. Deputy Noel Grealish. Deputy Michael Lowry. Deputy Verona Murphy. Deputy Dennis Naughton. Deputy Matt Shanahan. Deputy Peadar Tobin. Deputy Michael Collins. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae. Deputy Michael Healy-Rae. Deputy Matty McGrath. Deputy Carol Nolan. Deputy Richard O'Donoghue. Deputy Joan Collins. Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice. Deputy Marion Harkin. Deputy Michael McNamara. Deputy Thomas Pringle. Deputy Mark McSharry. Deputy Violet Ann Wynne.
On the question that the proposed arrangements for this week's business be agreed to, thorough result, Tá Seachto, yes 70, Neil Shaskahain, no 61. Sheila Mguil an Cheist Richa, agus Bogam Ryan ish. Tá méid bog a Ryan ish go dtí policy an rialtas nó reachtaíochta tá gealta, so arís ag tosnú leis sin féin I heachta Mary Lou MacDonald. Up to a minute.
Return to the issue of the redress scheme that is open today for those who experience trauma in mother and baby homes and in county homes. And I want to ask, first of all, to acknowledge that, of course, redress comes in many, many forms. It's not all about financial recognition, but trauma also comes in many, many forms. And the biggest design flaw in this scheme, in my opinion, is the 160-day rule. It's been correctly described as a real insult to many, many victims. Some 24,000 people are excluded for one reason or another from this redress scheme. And I just want to ask, as I didn't realise, but I have been informed that this is perhaps your last Leader's questions. Is that correct? Is that the correct situation? So I did not realise that that was the case. So I therefore wish you well. And I wish, above all else, on this issue, that you might reconsider and go and put those flaws to right. Goodbye, guys.
Thanks, Deputy. I think the main thing for us now is to get the scheme up and running. It's been a very long time coming, far too long coming, and the applications are open today, and we're very keen to implement that and press ahead with the other measures as well, the Remembrance Centre, the moralisation, the medical cards, and get what's been agreed by Government and the House operational as soon as possible.
As I did earlier. Taoiseach, for weeks we've seen growing numbers of men sheltering in tents around Mount Street, just a stone's throw from here, and of course in the city centre. Many of them in appalling conditions, and many of us found it very difficult when we went down to visit them over recent days. And I do want to pay tribute to the many volunteers who provided help and support. Now, I very much welcomed the fact that the men were being moved at the weekend to what we had hoped were better conditions in Crooksling. Those conditions, unfortunately, were, at least initially, very poor. I mean, we've all seen it. We've heard reports from the men themselves. I know they're improving now, and I'm getting updates all the time from our volunteer group who are offering support and help. But there are still men camped on Mount Street, Taoiseach and Minister O'Gorman, and indeed I was there twice myself yesterday, and again saw men who had come back from Crooksling because they just had nowhere else to go. So Taoiseach, Minister O'Gorman, Taoiseach, on your last Leader's questions, I am asking that you might take control of this issue, ensure that there is decent accommodation provided to those who come here seeking refuge.
Deputy.
Very much, Deputy. Over the course of last week, you and many deputies in this House raised the really concerning situation in Mount Street, and that's why I asked my department to act. That's why I asked my department to identify a location where people would have access to sanitation, to showers, to toilets, and to meals and to services. We were able to provide that at the site in Crooksling. The earliest we were able to provide that was last Saturday, and as soon as we were able to provide that, we did provide it, and we moved international protection applicants there there. There was a very significant amount of misinformation provided on the day in terms of the services. But let's be very clear: 15 toilets, 6 showers, and more being added at the moment. Access to safety net in terms of healthcare facilities, access to cross care in terms of wider facilities, all being provided there at the moment.
Started and completed can seem like an eternity, and that's when things go well. In the case of the Mercy Convent project in Naas, planning permission was obtained in 2012. The work commenced in 2017, and there's still no sign of the building being available. It was necessary to deploy the dispute mechanism, but that's obviously not working. 2 years after the building was sealed, there's still no date for when the new contractor will be on site to commence the 15-month final stage of this project. Taoiseach, the dispute mechanism is not fit for purpose, and when this kind of thing can happen, can you give an undertaking that you will review that, and will you give an assurance that the issue will be resolved in time for the 15-month project to be completed for September of 2025?
I'm not familiar with the particular individual project, but I will take it up with the Minister and come back to you directly.
I think that Sally Rooney nailed it. She said that the government is basking in the moral glow of condemning the bombers while preserving a cosy relationship with those who supply the bombs. Now, even as celebrations were in full swing in the White House on Sunday, Netanyahu and his war cabinet were no doubt making preparations for a ground invasion of Rafah. Rafah, a city of nearly 2 million people now, traumatised by war, majority living in tents. I think that Sinn Féin let themselves down in the United States last week, let themselves down badly. But I think, Taoiseach, you let the country down. I put it to you that given that you did not boycott the celebrations with genocide Joe Biden, that you should at least have openly criticised not just the bombers, but those supplying the bombs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. I think there's no more righteous glow than the moral indignation of isolating yourself and criticising everyone else. And that's not the way you influence people. And I've been working very hard in the past few months, as is the Taoiseach, in influencing the US position and influencing the EU position and bringing it closer to ours. And I think that has happened, not because of what we've done, but it has, at least in part, contributed to that. I don't see what you've done or your approach having contributed anything at all.
I wish you well if this is your last day taking leaders' questions, and to thank you for your friendship and loyalty over the last 7 or 8 years. Just to raise, in the aftermath of the referenda which we had and the government's insistence that they wanted to do something for carers, I am asking, will the government support our private member's motion, which will be coming before the Dáil next month, where we will be looking for the introduction or the initiation of a non-means-tested carers support scheme for carers? And secondly, the issue of disabilities and the waiting times that we have at present. Yesterday it was reported 8,900 children on a waiting list waiting for an assessment of need, and the NGO is saying that, that the HSE, or the HSE's own figures last October, saying it was 19,000 odd waiting for a needs assessment. We need to get to grips with what's happening here and have a true account so that we can plan for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. Referendum or no referendum, I think we need to do more to demonstrate that we value carers and that we're on their side. Mr Humphreys at the moment is bringing through proposals or bringing through legislation which will give pensioners a full state contributory pension, recognising their years caring as equivalent as PRSI contributions. I think that's very important. There are two sets of payments, well, there are a number of sets of payments we make to carers. There's the means tested care allowance, which the means test for which has been relaxed and will be from June. There's also the carer support grant, which is not means tested at all. And she is currently reviewing those payments in advance of the next budget. And then the areas that we're really trying to invest more in are therapies and treatments for people with disabilities and their assessments, and also getting more respite centres open, because carers need a break and need time off so they can keep doing what they do. Our real challenge there has been recruitment and actually finding skilled staff to take those positions.
Thank you. Ich habe Matty McGrath.
Massive housing crisis, which is shocking, truly, and indeed the situation of IPAS applicants in Mount Street, and Minister O'Grama decided to be out in Japan instead of looking after them. We have a case in Tipperary, Mr. Sean Meehan, who's facing imprisonment for housing himself in a perfectly suitable mobile home and very aesthetically placed in his own land, and he's facing jail early days of April. Now, hundreds of people marched in Clonmel last Friday. More people are meeting in Cashel and Moon next Saturday. And I think it's shocking that you can't introduce a statutory instrument. The Minister for Housing can do this. Maybe as your legacy you might do it. Because there are thousands of these throughout the country. They've housed themselves. They're not causing any damage to anybody. And they're not looking for a house off the state. Just a stroke of a pen, statutory instrument to allow these to a moratorium for 10 years. Because they'll make a huge dent in the housing crisis. If they're all forced to go on the housing crisis, it'll be another couple of thousand on it. And I think it makes sense that Sean Meehan shouldn't go to jail and his house shouldn't be destroyed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I have read about the case in the media. I am led to believe that it is now before the courts, so it is a matter that's sub judice and wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on it. But as is always the case, the courts will hear the prosecution, they'll also hear the defence, and I'm sure they'll make the right decision.
John Collins.
First of all, I want to put in the record of the House that I agree there should be a general election called now. But the main question I want to put to you, Taoiseach, is on behalf of a group of men who as children were sexually abused in day schools by Christian brothers. All the perpetrators were subsequently convicted. Sexual abuse is all about power and control. In your 2019 apology to children abused in day schools, you stated that the state failed them at the time and failed them again when it did not own up to its responsibility. We will not fail them a third time. In May 2023, the CE of Louth County Council, against the wishes of the then chair, withdrew a motion rescinding the freedom of Drogheda from Edmund Garvey. The actions by the CE was a devastating blow to the survivors. A state body had let them down with no accountability of the CE's actions from the Council or from the Minister for State. As far as these survivors were concerned, this is just another example of power and control being misused against the... So I put the question from the victims. In your view, is the state apology and promise you made in July 2019 now diminished?
I don't believe so, Deputy, that the state apology was sincere, and we've followed up on it through various actions. I have received some correspondence on that matter that you've raised, I think from Councillor Farrell and some others. But my advice is that it's not something that central government can intervene in, that it is a matter for the local authority.
Thank you very much. Deputy Pádraig O'Sullivan. Pádraig O'Sullivan.
Taoiseach, initially I'd just like to wish you best of luck in the future. I've known you for a few years here, and to be fair, I've always found you very forthcoming and reasonable to deal with, so I do wish you the best. I'd just like to raise with you the issue of SET allocations, and it's something that I have raised with the Minister for Education previously. Look, I taught for 15 years. I have a fair idea of how the model worked in the past. And I don't understand how the Department of Education, I do understand how they've removed complex needs as an assessment criteria, because the HSE and the CDNT teams have only provided them with 5% of the information that they required. So no longer will a student's disability, be they a child with Down syndrome, with a hearing impairment, a visual impairment, be taken into consideration for those allocations. So complex needs has been removed, and now we're only going to base those SET allocations on literacy and numeracy performance. I think that's wrong. I think it's a mistake, and on the basis that only 5% of the information has been provided, I think it's only fair and reasonable to ask that SET review would be deferred.
Thanks, Deputy. I discussed this with Minister Foley today and Minister Madigan only in the last week, and their explanation to me is that this new model is fairer. Two-thirds of schools will have the same number of hours, or gain hours in fact, and it's not the case that complex needs won't be a factor anymore at all. It's the school's data around the complex needs that will be used rather than HSC data, which I'm told is patchy and inconsistent. So it still remains a criterion, and there is an appeal process underway, or a review process underway for any school that wants to question its allocation. But I'd be happy to provide the Deputy with the detailed note on this, which I think, which for me anyway, was reassuring.
Gaza's on the edge of famine. It's man-made starvation caused by the deliberate actions of the Israeli government. And this comes on top of the horror and the brutality we've already seen. As we've already said, the EU Council meeting is coming up at the end of this week. What actions will you be asking from our European colleagues in relation to this? Because we need a strong European response. And in the absence of a strong European response, will you commit to Ireland acting alone, which we have a moral imperative to do here? Looking at things like passing the divestment bill, the Occupied Territories bill, recognition. There are things that we can do that are within our power alone if we fail to get agreement from our European colleagues.
Thanks very much, Deputy. We failed to have any conclusions on Israel-Palestine at the last European Council. I'm attending it tomorrow and on Friday. It's definitely my objective to get to the point where we actually have conclusions, where the European Union as a whole unequivocally calls for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, and the supply of adequate food, medicine and electricity to the Palestinian people living in Gaza, and also a two-state solution. As you know, when it comes to common foreign and security policy, the European Union acts unilaterally, and even one or two countries in their dwindling number would be able to block conclusions, but that's going to be the objective. In terms of acting unilaterally, I've never taken the view that acting unilaterally is the right approach. It tends to make you isolated, make your voice less heard, and has little effect on the ground. But we don't have to only act on an EU level. We could act on certain things like recognition with a group of like-minded countries.
Johnny Girk.
It will be 1 year since Ballin Tara mines closed, with the loss of 600 directly employed jobs and over 2,000 indirectly employed. The management and the unions are in negotiations, but progress is very slow. These workers and their families have been left with a feeling of uncertainty over whether the mine will reopen in the second quarter of this year, and if it will be, what will the terms and conditions for workers who in a lot of cases have big mortgages and kids going to school with lots of bills coming in. We also know that the company have asked for 200 voluntary redundancies. We need to make sure that what is offered to these workers is fair and acceptable to them for the time served. Only this week, Monday, we see where Ballin are investing $463.5 million at its mine in Sweden. No shortage of money, but we need to make sure that the Irish workers are respected as well. Can I ask you how much recent engagement Government or Minister Coveney had with the management and unions regarding Tara? This closure has a massive effect on workers' families in the town of Navan and surrounding areas.
Deputy, I know Minister Coveney, his department and his agencies are seized of this matter, and there has been engagement with the company, but I don't have an up-to-date brief on it, so I don't want to give you information that might turn out to be incorrect, but I'll make sure that my office sends you a written reply.
Brendan Griffin.
Thanks, Councillor. And could I just say, Taoiseach, today is the end of an era, and I really do want to thank you for everything you've done for our party as a member of Fine Gael, and for our country as well through your leadership over the last 7 years. People don't really see the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes and of the huge personal sacrifice that goes into the job of leadership, but you've done that with distinction. I want to wish you every happiness and health in the future, and as a wise Cork man said to me one time, this isn't a dress rehearsal, you only get one crack at life, so onwards and upwards, and I hope that every step in the future for you is a positive and successful one. Could I please, Count Carla, and thank you, I'm sorry for indulging, I want to raise with you, the business of government goes on. In 20 seconds, could I raise with you the very serious matter of rates revaluation letters that are landing in people's businesses around Kerry at the moment. And I know there are winners and losers in all of these revaluation situations, but for the losers at the moment in Kerry, and in some situations where we have people receiving 500% increases in their rates bills, it's just not sustainable. These businesses will close. Can there be an intervention to ensure that these people won't have to be paying these astronomical rates?
Thank you, Taoiseach.
I just want to thank Deputy Griffin for his kind remarks, and I'll certainly let the Minister know about the issue he raised in relation to the valuations. I think, as we all know, there are winners and losers, and it works out overall exactly the same, but sometimes people face very big increases, and there is a system by which that can be disputed and appealed to the Valuations Tribunal, and I would encourage anyone to do that.
Deputy Brendan Smith.
Future, and I appreciate the courtesy you always extended to me in debates in this House and in other fora as well. We are all well aware of the need to improve services for children and adults with a disability. I know from many engagements I have had with Minister Rabbitte over the past 3.5+ years that she is very determined to expand and improve disability services and facilities. We have particular difficulties in Cavan Monaghan. We need standalone respite centres for children and also for adults in both counties. Respite services are totally inadequate and parents are at their wits' end. We need, as a matter of urgency, a new day activation unit to replace the Clogher House Day Activation Unit, which is situated at present in a totally outdated and not fit for purpose building. Our most challenged young adults need proper supports. Therapy services for persons with different levels of dependency also need urgent improvement. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Minister Rabbitte, yes.
Thank you, Deputy Smith, for raising this important issue here today. The local HSE have sent forward a proposal for a standalone respite centre for Cavan Monaghan, for Cavan. It will support 50 families and it will be open 52 weeks of the year. I'm currently, along with Minister O'Gorman, finalising the National Respite Plan, of which Cavan Monaghan is a priority within it. So I can tell you that here today. And in relation to the day centre that you speak about, Clogher House, funding is being allocated under the capital plan for a new standalone purpose-built day service. And I want to thank both yourself, Minister Humphreys, and Niamh Smith, for your representations for the people of Cavan Monaghan in relation to this issue.
Minister, Deputy Fergus O'Dowd.
Okay, just congratulate you on your work as Taoiseach. Wish you well for the future. Thank you for your friendship and your availability at all times. The government policy in relation to international protection applicants is not working. Two fiascos recently, the situation down in Dublin where you have tents on the streets being removed in the middle of the night to a place where people don't want to go, and secondly put them into a hotel in Drogheda, over 500 people, where there's now no hotel left. These unfortunate people have nowhere to go because there's no recreation amenities attached to this hotel. The function room is gone, they can't go there. The only place they can go is walk across the town day in, day out. It's not good enough, it needs to change, Minister. We need support in Drogheda for the business community, for the tourism interest, and also an appropriate and proper meeting the needs of international protection applicants. The Minister's policy is turning ordinary good and decent people who support human rights, who support all of those right and proper things, but do not accept the fiasco that the Minister is imposing on us.
Minister.
Very much, Ceann Comhairle, and thanks, Deputy, and my department, and indeed all of Government, will continue to engage with yourself and the other Drogheda TDs about supporting the immediate needs within Drogheda of the business community and looking to support the move of other hotels back into the tourism sector. You're absolutely right in terms of the difficulties that the current approach necessitates, whether it is the use of hotel accommodation, whether it's the use of tented accommodation. That's why next Wednesday at Cabinet we'll be bringing forward the revised accommodation strategy, looking us to move away from this approach where we are entirely reliant on the private sector, looking at providing a key core of state-owned accommodation which can help us meet the needs of international protection applicants.
Question is as follows. Taoiseach, as you will be aware, in just over 10 days from now, Government will push ahead with the first of 4 hikes in the cost of petrol and diesel over the next 12 months. The 4 rises will add around 15 cents per litre to the cost of petrol and around 12 cents per litre to a litre of diesel. This has led to many people, and indeed consumer groups such as the Consumer Association of Ireland, to suggest that this is punishing motorists and pushing up the costs of living, as higher fuel prices will have an effect on lots of other goods and services because of the impact on hauliers and their increased operational costs. It will also adversely impact agricultural contracting services and farmers, as farming is a fuel-intensive occupation. Taoiseach, will you consider postponing these increases until at least the next budget, particularly in light of the fact that the current yield from VAT, excise duty and other levies on motor fuels amounted to around $6 billion last year?
Thanks, Deputy. I appreciate the price of the pump are rising, and that impacts on commuters, on motorists, on a lot of people in business, including hauliers. But I think, as deputies will remember, we reduced these excise rates on a temporary basis at a time when prices were over €2 a litre, and they're still thankfully well below that. And I don't think it would be possible for the government to reopen the budget now. There will be consequences down the line if we were to reopen the budget now. But we will, of course, monitor prices over the next couple of months.
OK, we're out of time, but we'll take 30-second questions from the 3 remaining deputies. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.
New valuation figures for commercial rates and properties in Kerry became effective on the 1st of January 2024. This has meant a massive increase for many ratepayers, in many instances with the demands received in recent days double, triple and even 4 times the amounts they normally paid back over the years. Many traders appealed the increased valuations by the due date in October 2023. Approximately 260 appeals are still with the Evaluation Office. However, many others have yet to appeal and are in the process of engagement with Tailteann and the Valuation Tribunal. Many traders in Kerry are contemplating financial ruin with the increased unreasonable demands they have received. What I'm asking is that the Valuation Tribunal pause the demands which are being disputed until they are resolved.
I'm asking you to pause because you're out of time.
All right. Yeah, this is very serious for the people.
I know, but we have only so much time. Deputy Whitmore, please. 30 seconds.
Be Ireland's largest production facility. It's a joint venture between CISC and the Irish Strategic Investment Fund. It was to start opening in 2024. Diggers were on site, cleared a few trees, and there has been no activity on site for at least the last 9 months. Can you give an update on that project? And can you also outline what kind of safeguards does the ISIF put in place to ensure that the development will happen when it is due to happen? Thank you.
Taoiseach, I also want to wish you well in a personal capacity today. But Taoiseach, we had the children from the Convent of Mercy National School in Naas here at Leinster House protesting about their school today. For the last 7 years, they've been walking past a magnificent school building, 2 prefabs, while the Department of Education dither and delay over the fitting out of the new school building. Students have spent their whole school lives walking past this school, unable to get in, within reach but out of touch. Out of touch like this government, there can be no more delay, and the parents, the families, the staff and the children have had enough. And what's the plan to finish off the school and finally open it up for the children of Naas?
3 questions there, please, if you would.
To thank the deputies for their questions. Just in relation to valuations, as I mentioned earlier, when there is a revaluation, some people see their rates go up, some see it go down, but overall there's no increase in revenue. And people are encouraged to make appeals to the Valuation Tribunal, but I will check with the Minister about the delays there and if something can be done in the interim. I don't have an update on the Greystone Media Campus, but I will seek it from the Minister of Finance and come back to you in writing. And in relation to the Convent of Mercy in Naas, I know a number of deputies have raised this, and I will look into it and come back to the deputy in writing, because I know a few deputies have raised it, and I don't know the reasons for the delay myself, but I can understand why it must be very, very frustrating for the children and parents and staff.
Questions on promised legislation. We go now to private members' bill for introduction, and I call on Deputy Jim O'Callaghan to move for leave to introduce the Maternity Protection Amendment Bill 2024.
I move, Count Corla.
Ken Coyle, I move to introduce the Maternity Protection Bill 2024. The purpose of this bill is to amend the Maternity Protection Acts which are in place so that a mother who has recently given birth to a child but who has been diagnosed during pregnancy or immediately after it with cancer or another serious illness may postpone her maternity leave until after she's had her treatment for the cancer or the serious illness. We know, Count Corla, that each year in Ireland approximately 60 women are diagnosed with cancer during pregnancy or immediately after the birth of their child. We don't have specific statistics on the number of women who are diagnosed with another serious illness during pregnancy or immediately after the birth of their child, but I suspect it's certainly as high. So we're dealing with approximately a figure in the region of 120 to 150 women per year who find themselves in the very distressful and unfortunate position that at a time just after they've given birth to a child and they should be enjoying their maternity leave, instead they find themselves in a situation where they're on effectively sick leave and are getting treated for the cancer or treated for the other serious illness. I suppose the effect of it is that the time that they're supposed to be spending on maternity leave is being eaten up by treatment for their illness. So in effect, the maternity leave to which they're entitled never really comes into operation, because whilst they're out from work in the immediate aftermath of the birth of their child, what's happening is they're being treated for a serious illness which in ordinary course is covered by sick leave. This is an unfortunate and it's clearly not an intended circumstances that exist within our legislation. However, it is something that I think could be rectified through the enactment of this piece of legislation that I'm introducing here today. I wish the Taoiseach all the best in his future career. However, in fairness to him, he did play a significant role in terms of introducing paternity leave into Ireland. And I think it would be a worthwhile addition to his legacy if he expedited this legislation which is being introduced today. The reason I say that is because we find ourselves in the unusual situation where men in Ireland are able to postpone their paternity leave to a time that suits them. However, conversely, women have no similar entitlement to postpone their maternity leave in circumstances where they've been diagnosed with cancer or another serious illness. I would be concerned that that dichotomy between the treatment of men and treatment of women may raise issues under Article 40.1 of the Constitution, but notwithstanding that, I think everyone in this House will recognise that there is an inherent unfairness in not permitting women to postpone their maternity leave so that they can enjoy their time with their child after they have had their treatment for the serious illness. The effect of not doing so means that they never really get the benefit of the maternity leave, which everyone in this House knows is so important. The legislation that I've introduced, Count Corla, seeks to amend the Maternity Protection Amendment Act, which was enacted in 1994, and there was an amendment then in 2004. And the proposed legislation seeks to introduce a new section, Section 14C, after 14B, and it provides that a woman who has been diagnosed with cancer or another serious illness during pregnancy or in the immediate aftermath of her pregnancy may then postpone that maternity leave to a time when she has recovered from the illness or the cancer. It then proposes, after that, certain regime which takes into account the entitlement of the employer to be apprised of the fact that the woman is seeking to postpone the maternity leave. It also seeks to recognise the fact that this will not interfere with any entitlement that an employee may have to sick leave under the Sick Leave Act 2022. So I'd ask Count Corla that consideration would be given to it. As I mentioned, the Taoiseach deserves to be commended for the role he played in terms of paternity laws that were introduced in Ireland. But when we have a situation such as this, where the maternity laws are manifestly unfair to that very small cohort of women who find themselves in the unfortunate situation that their maternity leave has been overtaken by sick leave because of an illness they have contracted during pregnancy or afterwards, that they are precluded from the benefits of the Acts. So it's something I think that everyone in the House would agree will be of benefit to women. I know it has the support of the Irish Cancer Society, and I'm sure it has the support of other organisations as well who have the priority of women at the foremost of their interest. Thanks, Ken Corla.
Is the bill being opposed? It's not being opposed, so the motion for leave to introduce is agreed. Deputy Callahan, would you like to move that the second stage be taken in private member's time?
I move.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We move now to a motion regarding ministerial rota for parliamentary questions. I call on the Chief Whip to move the motion. Is the motion agreed?
Agreed.
Motion agreed. We move to a motion regarding the consideration of estimates by committee. Call again on the Chief Whip to move the motion.
I move.
Is the motion agreed?
Agreed.
Motion agreed. That allows us to move on then to Taoiseach's questions. I think you're taking 1 to 9, Taoiseach, together, is that correct?
Can call pro se questions 1 to 9 together. When we published the programme for government in June 2020, we said that this is a programme to recover our economy, rebuild our society, renew our communities and respond to the challenges we face both nationally and internationally. This will be a government of enterprise, creating new jobs, preparing the jobs for the future, driving our economic recovery and improving the quality of life for all our people. I believe we're making good progress in this regard. Individual commitments in the programme for government are advanced through coordinating mechanisms of the Cabinet Committee structure. The 10 Cabinet Committees established by government reflect the full range of policy areas that are set out in the programme for government. Cabinet Committees meet regularly to accomplish their work. The strategy statements of all government's departments reflect the national priorities outlined in the PFG. The Department of the Taoiseach is continuing to help advance the programme for government commitments in the following significant policy areas: the implementation of housing for all, including additional initiatives as necessary to advance the crucial housing-related commitments; continued engagement at EU and international level on the situation in the Middle East, including by calling for full observance of international law by all parties; working to build consensus at EU level to take a more proactive approach in assisting a negotiated two-state solution and lasting peace process; and increased funding for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, or UNRWA. Engagement with EU leaders to advance high-level objectives in the programme for government, in particular economic and competitiveness issues, energy security, external relations, including the UK, as well as continuing our strong collective EU response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Pursuing our international commitments, including strengthening our relationship with the US and implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Advancing the government's commitments on Shared Island, ensuring implementation of New Decade New Approach commitments, working with the relevant departments north and south in advancing these goals. Strengthening the British-Irish bilateral relationship, including with London and the devolved governments in Wales and Scotland. Implementation of the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Amendment Act 2021 and the government's Climate Action Plan. Advancement in sláinte care, improving access, outcomes, affordability for patients by increasing the capacity and effectiveness of the workforce, infrastructure and provision of patient care. Oversight and implementation of the third domestic sexual and gender-based violence strategy. Oversight of the implementation of a policing service for the future. A government plan to implement the report to the Commission on the future of policing in Ireland. Development of the wellbeing framework for Ireland and driving its integration into policy making and budgetary systems. Publication of Harnessing Digital, the digital framework, February 22, and the establishment of the Child Poverty and Wellbeing Programme Office in the Department of the Taoiseach to progress commitments identified in the programme for government that will have the greatest effect on the lives of children who experience poverty.
Look, to wish you all the best personally. I know it is not an easy day for you, but to wish you the best for the future. Taoiseach, in your programme for government, you committed to reduce waiting times for assessment of needs under the Disability Act, and you committed to doing so by using the standard operating procedure which Mr Harris brought in January 2020. However, parents became very quickly aware of the shortcomings of that approach, and they were aware that the rights of their children were being undermined by an inadequate assessment. In 2022, you'll recall the High Court struck down that standard operating procedure. The HSE was found short-cutting disability rights. Now assessment of need waiting lists are longer than ever. Children are entitled to assessment within 3 months. Few, if any, receive it in that time frame. There are 8,900 children whose assessment is overdue, and most are overdue by more than 3 months, not to mention the other children, maybe over 5,000, who were robbed of a proper assessment of their needs. These children's rights are being denied. They deserve better.
The government has spent time in office finding shortcuts around the rights of people with disabilities instead of planning to meet their needs. Taoiseach, what is your government's plan to tackle the backlog of assessments of needs and deliver fit-for-purpose, proper disability services for children?
What I was saying earlier about the SET allocation, because I just have a score sheet here in front of me from a school principal. It includes a score weighting towards, as I said, a literacy, numeracy, and then the educational disadvantage or geographical location of a school. So nowhere in that assessment is there any provision for complex needs, as I stated. And I suppose when it comes to brass tacks, that's the way things are scored and that's the way they're weighted. So just on that basis, I would ask you just once more to go back to both ministers, just to ensure that schools aren't being disadvantaged, as I'm suggesting. Look, my question today, and it would be remiss of me not to take the opportunity on your last day to raise for the last time the issue of rare diseases and specifically reimbursement. We have over 40 stakeholders from patient groups and industry coming in to meet the cross-party group tomorrow at 12 p.m. in the AV room. I'd encourage you or anybody here to attend if possible tomorrow. But ultimately, what's going to be spoken about there is how we are, as I have said here consistently for 3 years in the Dáil, laggards in the European context when it comes to reimbursement of drugs. So, given that it is your last day at Leaders' Questions, Taoiseach, I would ask that before you depart, possibly you would look at the possibility of establishing a task force or some kind of a specialist group that would look in specifically to the whole area of reimbursement. Thank you.
Laggards, was it?
Oh, it's definitely laggard.
Very good. Deputy Paul Murphy, please.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, there are 20,000 members of Fine Gael. I think it makes up 0.4% of the population. They are people who, no offence to them, are disproportionately older, disproportionately richer, disproportionately to the programme for government it is, disproportionately more conservative than the average person in society. Taoiseach, do you think that it's appropriate for this group of 20,000 people to decide who is going to be the next Taoiseach to implement the programme for government? Do you not think it is repugnant to the notion of democracy that it is that 20,000 people, disproportionately within them, the parliamentary party, that will get to decide as opposed to the people? I mean, this government was formed in an attempt to thwart the wish of people for change as expressed in the February 2020 general election. That's why Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael came together in a formal coalition for the first time ever. But do you not accept that just purely on the grounds of democracy alone, it is time for the people to decide, do they want to continue with rule by landlord, for landlord, or to vote for an alternative?
Deputy McBain.
Taoiseach, it's an out-of-touch government, and you've been an out-of-touch Taoiseach. I mean, rarely was that seen more than in your interview on the 6 o'clock show, where you raised issues relating to care and disability. You showed your Thatcherite colours. I suspect that that was the moment that the care referendum was lost. But you're about to repeat the mistake. The government's green paper on disability reform, again, aping the Tories. Rather than dismantling barriers and forcing employers to make workplaces people with disability friendly, this green paper points towards forcing disabled people into work under threat of loss of benefits. Taoiseach, would you not learn the lesson of the referendum campaign that you will rile the disability community in this country at your peril and scrap that green paper now?
Now, we're running out of time for the Taoiseach to respond. Deputy Padda Tobin and then Deputy Rory O'Murco. Briefly, please, if you would.
The rejection of the government's referendum proposals was colossal. It was absolutely incredible to see the most significant loss in terms of referendums happen to this government. And there's no doubt in my mind that there is a trust element on the floor now in terms of this government. There is a bubble politically in Ireland between the political establishment, many of the NGOs and some of the media. At the heart of the government's carers proposal was this promise that they were going to do everything to help carers. But most people who are either carers or in need of care saw the reality of the government's lack of delivery. They saw the fact that respite services were closed in many counties. They saw the fact that people couldn't get access to carers' allowance. They saw the fact that childcare is closing, that nursing homes are closing, that children are being put into state care at the moment, unregulated state care, and actually going missing at the moment. Now, it's incredible to see ministers like Minister Heather Humphreys, Minister Roger O'Gorman promise that there will be a new dawn in terms of the provision of care after the referendum. But the referendum is not needed. All is needed is the government will. So now will the government promise? Will the government deliver for those who are suffering the most in this country?
Very briefly, please.
Taoiseach, personally I wish you well. But I'd add my voice to the rest of the opposition that say the next Taoiseach and the government, and the decision should be made now, and it should be made by the people. I want to follow on from Deputy O'Leary. When we talk about obviously the assessment of need backlogs, when we talk about the people who can't get assessments, can't get therapies, but we're not having the real conversation. Even if we get the workforce planning right now, we know we cannot fill all the positions in the Children Disability Network teams and primary care and everything that's needed. We know we have an issue at times in relation to the education system versus the health and medical options. We need to deliver some sort of scenario where we talk to those stakeholders, where we talk to those people who are therapists, who we talk to those who are psychologists, and we come up with some sort of option in relation to the best service we can offer as we strive to make sure we fill all these positions, because otherwise we're going to keep having the same conversation over and over again and failing a huge amount of families.
We've just a little under 4 minutes for a response. No, you weren't here on time, I'm sorry. Well, you weren't here when you did, but you weren't here when your question came up. So we're out of time. Yes, they had their hands up before you were here. You can't come in at the end when your question has been asked and we're running out of time and come in and consume the time that is required for the Taoiseach to respond. No, question is, listen, it's grouped. You may answer it anyway. Will you stop, Deputy, please, and have a bit of respect for the rules? You're out of order. I'm not going to get involved in the debate with Taoiseach.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Look, Deputy's raised the issue of assessments of needs, and I know we have a very big problem with waiting times for that. We all know it from our constituency clinics. And the real struggle there is finding enough clinically and appropriate qualified staff to carry out the assessments, and then also provide all the therapies as well. But we have some big recruitment campaigns underway. Money's been set aside for them, and hopefully it'll make a real difference. But it does also demonstrate the pitfalls that can exist by putting certain rights in law. Unfortunately, this is an example of where a right put in law hasn't resulted in a right on the ground or a right in reality. Rather, it has led to a situation whereby people working in the government, in the disability sector, are spending their time trying to settle cases instead of provide better services, and also where some budgets that would have otherwise been spent on services are being diverted to damages. And I think it is a pitfall that we're going to have to take into account when people call for other rights to be put into the law. Just putting into the law doesn't mean it actually happens. Not at all. That's not how it works, unfortunately. In terms of the SUT model, I'm advised that the model makes an allocation on the basis of a number of inputs, including enrolment numbers. Children with complex needs are recognised in the model by using school-level data from standardised tests in order to reflect the relative levels of overall need. The model seeks to distribute teaching resources in the fairest possible manner, taking into account as much evidence as possible in respect of individual schools and evidence in respect of possible use of resources. The standardised test results identify pupils who are achieving below the average and may require some degree of additional teaching support. These are consistent and reliable indicators to identify additional learning need, particularly those with the highest level of need. And then just on the issue of the reimbursement of medicines, I'm not sure I'll be able to set up a task force in the next couple of weeks, but I do promise the Deputy that perhaps this is something that we can work on together, because it's something that I've been sincere about for a long time and haven't managed to unlock whatever the problem is. And I'm going to keep an interest in it, because I don't understand or accept why any patient who needs a medicine that is available publicly in Britain or another similar jurisdiction can't have it here, and I think they should. Just in relation to Deputy Murphy's question, again, as I said earlier, our constitution has been with us since 1937. It's clear, it's the people's document, the rules are there in black and white. The Taoiseach is elected by the Dáil, the government is elected by the Dáil is elected by the people. And the reason why we have the current government deputy is not because of some sort of plot or conspiracy theory, it's because the parties made up in the government, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Greens won 51% of the vote. That's why we are the government. An election will happen within the next year. Just in relation to the Green Paper on disability payments reform, just to be very clear, it is just a Green Paper for discussion, for debate, for consultation. It's not a set of proposals as yet, and it's not an effort to reduce benefits or to make savings or to ape the welfare reforms that occurred in the UK. Quite the opposite. We've introduced new benefits and increased benefits over the course of the past 7 years. Ken Corley, I propose to take questions 10 to 12 together. The Parliamentary Liaison Unit in the Department of the Taoiseach assists the Government in its relationship with the Oireachtas. It works with the Government, or rather works with the Office of the Government Chief Whip on issues that arise at the Business Committee and the Committee on Standing Orders and Dáil Reform, including Dáil Reform proposals and amendments to standing orders. The unit helps the Office of the Government Chief Whip in the implementation of the Government's legislative programme. The unit also assists the Office of the Leader of the Green Party in work relating to Cabinet committees and oversight of the programme for government. The Parliamentary Liaison Unit provides detailed information on upcoming matters in the Dáil and Shannon, highlights any new Oireachtas reform issues, and provides assistance in establishing the new procedures arising from Dáil reform. The unit is staffed by one PO, one AO. There are currently 2 vacancies, one for the position of an HEO and also one for a CO.
Last weekend, 1,300 asylum applicants were living in inhumane condition in Dublin before last weekend. Sorry, the 130, I should say. Without on-site hygiene facilities, toilets accessible by night, or washing facilities. In an attempt to hide government failure on asylum accommodation, they were put on a bus and moved to the outskirts of Dublin to the site of the former nursing home at Crooksling. The conditions here were so bad that several of the men who had been ferried there felt they were better off on the street. This is another example of the government's failure to conduct a community services audit prior to the placement of refugees in a given area. Government failure to ensure proper amenities and services are put in situ places communities across the state under enormous pressure, as well as, of course, the asylum seekers themselves. The government has failed utterly and appears to be led by a policy which relies on speculators who make tens of millions of euros from the process. People want to do the right thing and support those seeking protection, but state failure is putting intense pressure on limited services within community. Taoiseach, why did the government only recently start an audit of available accommodation places for international protection applicants? Is this audit now complete? What are its findings? And when will we see the introduction of a fair, efficient and enforced immigration system?
I want to speak up on behalf of 118 workers whose pay is being slashed on March the 31st by your government. They are public health service staff who are out sick with long COVID, who have been on full pay as part of a dedicated scheme which you plan to scrap on the 31st of March. Many of them are nurses. They were on the front line. They risked their health for us. They did it before vaccines were available. They did it with insufficient PPE. And now they suffer. They suffer from fatigue, they suffer from brain fog, they suffer from migraine and other symptoms of long COVID. After you cut their pay, their incomes will be down by 50% after 3 months. These are people who are members of households, not just with mortgages, but with really significant added medical costs. This is cruelty, Taoiseach. Is it going to be part of your legacy, or are you going to do the right thing and extend that scheme? I'm asking you to give me a direct answer on that. This is a really, really pressing matter.
Thanks, Corla. Taoiseach, we had the announcement about the opening of the Mother and Baby Redress Scheme arising from the legislation around that scheme today. Now, there is widespread anger among people who went through the mother and baby institutions over the arbitrary 6-month rule and the exclusions from that redress scheme. And I frankly have never heard an answer from the Minister or from the Government as to that arbitrary 6-month rule. I'm an adoptee myself, and any adoptee and any psychologist, anybody who knows anything about children, will know that the question of the impact of the regime that existed around taking children away from their mothers because they happen to be unmarried, that the damage and the trauma starts from the instant of the moment of separation. That is, if you like, the crime. And that the trauma that may result from that forcible separation of mothers from children is the issue that needs to be redressed. So how, in the face of the testimony of survivors themselves of these institutions and everything we know about the development of human psychology in children, can the government even now stand over this 6-month exclusion? It's shocking, Taoiseach. As a doctor, you should know that. So I ask, have you got a response to that? Because even at this late stage, you should do the right thing and extend that scheme to all of those who are the victims of that terrible regime and forced through those institutions.
Taoiseach, right through the referendum campaign, Aontú said that the Care Amendment was designed by the Department of Finance. We said that the wording of the referendum was designed to protect the budgets. We learned from a leak of the Attorney-General and from FOIs that have been subsequently published by the Department of Finance, which basically gives credibility and weight to our challenge during the referendum. The note to the Department of Finance says that the language was intended to avoid concrete and mandatory obligations to provide support to those who needed them. Now, the advice of the Attorney-General also said that there would be no certainty in relation to what was meant by durable relationships and that it would lead to increased litigation into the future. So I'm asking you two things today. First of all, will you make sure that there's an investigation, an independent investigation into the leaking of the Attorney-General advice before the referendum? And secondly, will you hold an independent investigation into the fact that your Minister, Minister Roderick O'Gorman, misled and misinformed the Dáil and the Irish people as to the advice that he got from the Attorney-General, and will you call for his resignation?
Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, Chairman Corla. Taoiseach, I want to ask, when are we going to get legislation for 100% redress for those affected by apartment and duplex defects? It's now almost 2 years since the government received a report that revealed the scale of this problem, up to 100,000 families affected, as a consequence of a regime of self-certification introduced by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. It is over a year since we had a very welcome political commitment from the government to say we're going to have a 100% redress scheme. But we don't have a bill, we don't have heads of bill, we have nothing to make that commitment a reality. There's an interim funding scheme, that's welcome, but that is not 100% redress. If we don't get the heads of bill very, very shortly, we're not going to have it in place before the end of this government, before a general election. Is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? This is having real impacts on people's lives. I'll give you a recent example. Morrowfield development in Tala next door is Deer Park are affected by water leaking, mould, damage to ceilings as a result of unsuitable tiles installed by the developer. But not only is it bad for those people living in it, but then when you have a case of an eviction by a landlord and the landlord actually is willing to sell to South Dublin County Council under the tenant
tenant in situ scheme to avoid the tenant entering homelessness, and South Dublin County Council says no. We will not be buying it because of the problems with this building, despite the fact that they actually already own 12% of properties in this development. So when are we going to have the legislation to deal with the underlying issue in terms of 100% redress, and will you make sure that tenant in situ does happen in these cases?
Very briefly, Deputy O'Maraco.
I brought up the issue of fire station officer from Dunleer, John Malloy, before. Your office has come back to me in relation to it. I know that at the end of the day, the difficulty here is that he will be turning 60 on May 24th. He is the 5th man that makes up the minimum crew of 5, so not only would we be losing him with no one to replace him, we could also have an issue in relation to the fire station. Now, you have said that I would be getting an answer from Deeper and from Minister Paschal Donoghue, but what we need is some sort of interim fix. If we're not going to have an answer from Deeper quick enough, even if it's circular, as happened before, that could be given out from the Minister for Housing from Darragh O'Brien's office. We just need to find some sort of solution that will allow John Malloy to keep operating and will allow Dunleer Fire Station to stay open.
Again, just want to thank the deputies for their questions. Just in relation to iPass in Mount Street, officials visited the tents on the 16th of March. Contrary to some reports, Crooksing has toilets, hot showers, personal toiletries, food, a bus service to Dublin, and there is 24-hour security on site. Safety Net is providing health screening, which commenced on the 18th of March. There's a building where meals are served and men can charge phones and have food provided. Crosscare is also conducting support visits, that's essentially what is being provided at Crooksing at the moment. Just in relation to long COVID and COVID, I'll have to come back to the Deputy with a more definitive answer, but my understanding is that COVID is now being treated as any other respiratory virus would be treated, and long COVID is being treated as any other chronic disease would be treated. And it would be difficult to explain to somebody who perhaps has MS or Parkinson's or some other chronic illness why their employment rights are different to those who have long COVID. I think we've moved beyond the idea that COVID is a different category of disease to other viral syndromes or post-viral syndromes. And the suggestion that people who have long COVID acquired at work is, of course, not necessarily the case. Most people acquired COVID in their homes where they spend most of their time. That may not have been the case with everyone, but that was generally the case. Just in relation to the mother and baby home institution scheme, I think the Minister set out the thinking behind this on several occasions. It is an €800 million scheme. It's the biggest one of its nature ever. And redress is about more than financial compensation. It's also about the birth information and tracing. It's about the medical cards and other practical supports that are being provided. Just Deputy Muraku's question, I'll follow up that matter on Mr. Malloy. It would be strange if he was let go and then could be or forced to retire and then rehired again in a few months' time. So I think we'll need a common sense approach to this, if at all possible. But we'll follow up that with the Department of Public Expenditure. Deputy Tobin asked about the referendums. Referendums are over. They happened. The result has been accepted by the government. In relation to the leak of the Attorney General's advice, it was only 1 day's worth of advice. There was a lot more to it than that, than the 10 pages that were leaked and published. And to me, reading that particular 10 pages, what it showed to me is that the term strive, in the AG's view and in my view, was a strong term, was justiciable, would have led to additional rights for carers and would potentially have left the state open to litigation and open to costs. So if anything, it supported the arguments that Minister Gorman and others made in favour of a yes vote. Of course, it was the view of the Department of Finance and Department of Public Expenditure to use the weakest language possible in order to minimise the potential costs of the state. That is actually their job. It is the job of the government departments in charge of the money to warn government about the cost of anything we commit to do. Doesn't stop us committing to do it. And that's why we did choose strong wording like strive, and you'll see in the AG's advice in that regard. When it comes to durable relationships, you will never find an AG that will ever say to you that any new language in legislation or a constitution is certain. And again, that's something I think that if we were to get to the point where we publish advice from the AG, it would have to be written in a different way, because anybody who's been in government would understand that the AG will always say what to us is obvious, that you cannot with absolute certainty say what a court would decide. But that was presented in a very different way than the advice certainly was read or read by me. And just Deputy Murphy's questions on but look, that's going to be not a matter for me now anyway. But leak investigations rarely lead anywhere unless you're actually willing to carry out searches of places and so on. And I don't think you're actually calling for that. Perhaps you are, but you would start. You know where the search would start, obviously. And I don't think you're calling for that. And I don't think people who believe in a free press would call for that. And to be very clear, I'm not calling for that. Then just in relation to the referendums, in relation to the apartment defects, we expect of that legislation this year, and I'll follow up on the issue around the tent in situ.
Question 13, please.
I propose to take questions 13 to 18 together. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and I wrote a joint letter to the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on the 14th of February, expressing our deep concern at the deteriorating situation in Israel and Gaza, and particularly its impact on women and children. With the risk of an even greater humanitarian catastrophe posed by Israeli military operations in Rafah, and all that has occurred and continues to occur in Gaza since October 2023, we ask that the EU Commission undertake an urgent review of whether Israel is complying with its human rights obligations under the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Article 2 of the Association Agreement provides that relations between the parties shall be based on respect for human rights and democratic principles in their internal and international policy, and constitutes an essential element of this agreement. Given the urgency of the situation, we hope that the Commission will undertake the review as soon as possible, and if it considers Israel to be in breach of its obligations, that it will propose measures to the Council for adoption. Such measures could include suspending the agreement in whole or in part. It would then be for the Council to decide how to proceed. Our letter also addressed several other important issues. We reiterated our total condemnation of Hamas' indiscriminate terrorist attacks on the 7th of October, and we called for the immediate and unconditional release of the remaining hostages. We also expressed our concern at the alleged involvement of staff members of UNRWA in the Hamas attack, but said that UNRWA must be allowed to continue its vital work in Gaza, and that EU support for UNRWA must be maintained. As the House will be aware, the government has increased our national contribution to €20 million. Our letter also recalled that the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to take immediate and effective measures to ensure urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance are provided in Gaza. These orders are binding. President von der Leyen has acknowledged the receipt of the letter, and I expect the Commission to revert with a substantial response to our serious concerns as soon as possible. The request for a review of the Association Agreement at EU level was discussed at the FAC on the 19th of February, which is attended by the Taoiseach, and I'll raise it again at the European Council meeting later this week. Ireland will continue to raise our concerns about the desperate situation in Gaza at every available opportunity. We urgently need a lasting ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the provision of much-needed food, medicine and utilities to the people of Gaza. Finally, we set out in our letter a two-state solution represents the only way to end the cycle of violence and to bring peace and security to the people of Israel and Palestine. We'll continue to work with the EU, our Arab and international partners to secure precisely that outcome.
Your announcement this morning. And in relation to the question, I hope that review will take place and that it will take place as soon as possible. It's clear that you delivered a very strong message in Washington regarding the urgent need for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. As you know, aid agencies have warned of an imminent famine in the enclave. An unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding. The EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, has spoken about how starvation is being used as a weapon of war by Israel. The international community has finally woken up to this appalling situation, better late than never. Humanitarian aid needs to get into Gaza by land, sea and air. Ireland is to be commended for its continuing funding of UNRWA. Canada and Sweden has resumed its funding of the agency, and the EU Commission is now providing €50 million to it. The EU has also opened up a corridor from Cyprus. The US are promising to build a port to ship in vital aid, and Jordan is coordinating airdrops with other countries. But Israel must open up the land crossings. Taoiseach, in your talks in Washington, did you get any grounds for hope that a sustained scale-up of the delivery of humanitarian assistance could be organised? And could Ireland offer any practical help and assistance in that regard to get aid into Gaza, perhaps by working with other countries?
Over 13,000 children are among the 31,000 people killed in Gaza in a little over 5 months, with 72,000 injured. Having completely exhausted food supplies and coping capacities, over 1 million people are struggling with catastrophic hunger and starvation, and famine is imminent. In the past number of days, Israel has denied UNRWA Commissioner General Lazzarini entrance to Rafah, while also subjecting the 1.5 million people seeking shelter there to overnight missile attacks. Those responsible for cold-blooded massacre, war crimes and genocide currently enjoy what is among the most preferential diplomatic, economic and trading relationships with the EU of virtually any non-EU country, worth billions of euro each year. Your joint letter, along Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, seeking an urgent review of whether Israel is complying with its human rights obligations under the EU-Israel Association Agreement, was a welcome intervention. Because while at various points the EU or individual member states have been quick to initiate reviews of Palestinian NGOs or funding of UNRWA, any attempt to pressure Israel to end their onslaught and adhere to international humanitarian law has proceeded at a woeful pace. Taoiseach, I believe, just if I picked you up correctly, that you haven't received a response from your letter to Commission von der Leyen, if you can just confirm that. And have you got any feedback from any sources to a review, if it will be conducted, has a process begun, and at what pace will that proceed in order to reach some form of conclusion?
Further deputies, Deputy McBarry.
I'd just like to challenge you on a point that you raised earlier on, when you said that my approach had not assisted the people of Gaza, had zero effect. By implication, you're talking about the approach of socialists. By implication, you're talking about the global protest movement of which we are part. And your statement is not correct, in my view. Why did the man you were spending time with on Sunday at the White House, Joe Biden, change his position to the point where he now opposes a ground assault in Rafah? It's because of the pressure he feels from below. The huge protests in US cities, the big number of votes he's lost in the Democratic primaries, and the big number of votes that he's fearful of losing in the general election. The protest movement in the United States certainly would have been boosted had you boycotted the events last week. But even if you hadn't, and had made a criticism of Biden and the US, as Sally Rooney says, not just of the bombers, but those supplying the bombs, it would have been boosted as well. It's a pity that you failed to do so, but I think on the point you challenged me on, I don't think you've got right on your side there.
Boyd Barrett, please.
Taoiseach, you rejected our call and the call of huge numbers of people across the world to boycott Joe Biden because of his complicity with the genocidal massacre that Israel is committing, the fact that he has armed Israel to the teeth and enabled it to commit that massacre. Did you ask him to stop arming Israel? You were asked, because Mary Robinson echoed the calls of millions across the world who were saying, if the United States and Western governments stop arming Israel, they won't be able to continue with this. And that's the truth. That is the truth, isn't it? First of all. They get all their weapons, made in the USA, billions in US aid. Did you say to him directly, will you please stop arming Israel and enabling its ability to commit a genocide? Because I suspect you didn't. And Mary Robinson asked you to, and we asked you to, and to my mind you should have. Lastly, is there any point at which, if you think about the comparison with apartheid South Africa, is there any point at which a boycott of a state that is committing the crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinians justifies the sort of boycott that was imposed on apartheid South Africa?
Time for the Taoiseach to respond. Deputy Paul Murphy.
I want to ask you about the weapons coming through Irish airspace. They shot up in October of last year. They went from an average of about 100 exemptions for the carriage of munitions of war and civil aircraft per month to about 200, 190 in October, and have stayed at a consistently high level since October. What happened in October, October 7th, and then the genocidal onslaught that we've seen by Israel on Gaza. So, at the very least, it would seem very strange, very coincidental for the increase in the carriage of munitions on civil aircraft through this country going up dramatically at the time that the war on Gaza starts. It would seem, on the face of it, that there's likely a connection between the two. But we don't know, do we, Taoiseach? Because you refuse to inspect aircraft. You give permissions and then you don't inspect. Will you inspect the aircraft at Shannon Airport and elsewhere?
Deputy O'Murray, briefly, please.
Netanyahu's Israel at this point in time obviously is operating a policy of slaughter and starvation and famine. This is how he intends to ensure that not only will there be no Palestinian state, there mightn't even be a Palestinian people. And we all dread what's ahead in Rafah. We did welcome your letter to Ursula von der Leyen. I would reiterate what Deputy O'Leary said, that it is somewhat shocking that there hasn't been a reply in relation to it. And if the EU-Israel Association Agreement, if the humanitarian conditions aren't being breached at this point in time by Israel, well then nobody will ever breach any humanitarian conditions. But I also want to know, does a review require unanimity? And we have another European Council that's coming up at this point in time, and week and late as it will be, will we see a call for a ceasefire? Germany, like others, not only have they supported Israel politically, they have also supported in the sense of weapons. That is something that attention has to be drawn on. And then it's what we can do. We know there's pre-legislative scrutiny going on in relation to the illegal settlements divestment bill. That's something we can do now, or a means of doing that, that this state doesn't put any money into illegal settlements. And then are we anywhere on recognising the state of Palestine, and have we any takers in Europe or across the world who will join us in relation to doing that necessary piece of work?
Just in relation to the humanitarian situation in Gaza and funding for UNRWA, we call on all states to restore their funding for UNRWA pending the outcome of the investigation about possible collaboration. The EU has done that and has restored funding, and we want other countries to do the same. In relation to my talks in Washington, yes, we talked about the US putting more pressure on Israel to allow more trucks through. That's being done. And also the US has proposals to build a temporary jetty or port to allow more aid to get through. But I think we all agree that it needs to go through by land. There's only so much you can do by port and by air. We have had some conversations with Jordan about how we might be able to help in a practical way. But the main way we can help is through money and through political pressure, and that's what we're doing. In relation to the Sanchez-Varadkar letter to President von der Leyen, that has been followed up on. It was discussed twice at Foreign Affairs Council. The discussion was led by Vice President Borrell. He asked ministers for a political steer on it and as to how to proceed, and there was not consensus. Some countries took the view that a review or action should be initiated in order to put pressure on Israel. Other countries took the view that that should not be done. Absent consensus to move things forward, things haven't moved forward, but I will be raising again tomorrow in my discussions with Vice President Borrell and President von der Leyen In relation to Deputy Barry, happy to clarify that when I was referring to your approach, I was referring to calls of boycotts of our allies, like the US and President Biden. I don't think that would be a productive effect. I think the slot would just have been filled by somebody else, quite frankly. I don't think it would have resonated around the world. But I do think that the protests are important and they are effective. And the protests that have happened around the world have been helpful, quite frankly, on this issue to those of us who are trying to get much the same outcome as you are, albeit a two-state solution rather than a one-state one, which almost nobody on the ground actually wants. In relation to my discussions with President Biden, I discussed US military aid for Ukraine and for Israel. President Biden made it very clear that Israel has its own military strength and that the US would continue military aid for Israel so it can defend itself against the many countries that don't recognise it and would wish to attack it. Just in relation to former President Robinson, she didn't contact me in advance of the meeting. Where President Biden, certainly not directly. There's no letter, no call, no message, but she may have done indirectly, but that would have been very late in the day. In relation to recognition...
Did you ask him not to?
Please.
Did you ask him to stop sending the weapons?
Please. We're out of time.
Well,
anyway.
we discussed the matter.
Did you ask him not to send the weapons or not?
Well, I believe I did, but if that's what you're asking me, but
yes.
It's kind of a moot point when somebody says to you that the opposite, you know.
That concludes leaders' questions, Taoiseach's questions at this stage. We move on now to statements on pre-European Council meeting of the 21st, 22nd of March, pursuant to Standing Order 124. I call on the Taoiseach to make his statement under Standing Order 55. Would you require it, Taoiseach? You have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll participate in the March meeting of the European Council in Brussels tomorrow and Friday. The agenda will cover Ukraine, security and defence, the Middle East, enlargement, migration, agriculture and the European semester. There will be discussion on specific foreign policy issues, including the death of Alexei Navalny and the situation in Belarus. Leaders will take stock of preparations for the new strategic agenda 24 to 29. I'll also participate in the Euro Summit scheduled for Friday, and leaders will also mark the 30th anniversary of the European Economic Area Agreement with the Prime Ministers of Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway. In my statement, I'll cover Ukraine, Russia security and defence, the situation in the Middle East, agriculture and the strategic agenda. Our discussions will start with a working lunch on Thursday with Secretary-General of the UN, Antonio Guterres. I expect that he will take the opportunity to raise the desperate situation in Gaza, where the work of an adequately funded UNRWA is needed more urgently than ever. I'll make clear Ireland's full support for the indispensable role of the UN as part of a rules-based international order. In our meeting proper, we will take stock of the situation in Ukraine as we face into the third year of war. It's an opportunity to restate our unwavering support for Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to make it clear that we will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine for as long as it takes. Russia's imperial war is existential for Ukraine, but is also fundamental for European and global security. If he's successful in Ukraine, we know that Putin will not stop there. Since February 2022, the European Union has provided unprecedented political, financial, humanitarian, military and diplomatic assistance. This must continue. At the European Council, leaders will consider how to speed up procurement and delivery of the equipment Ukraine so urgently needs. I very much welcome the recent agreement on the Ukraine Assistance Fund, which will sit within the European Peace Facility. It will make an additional €5 billion available for vitally needed equipment for Ukraine. Ireland's contribution under this mechanism will continue to be non-lethal, given our policy of military neutrality. While the EU continues to assist Ukraine, we must also hold Russia to account. The recent adoption of the 13th package of EU sanctions against Russia is very welcome. We must continue to work together to close loopholes and prevent circumvention. Leaders will also reiterate calls for sanctions to be prepared against Belarus, North Korea and Iran for their role in bolstering Russia's efforts. Work in progressing the implementation of the recent agreement at EU level to set aside the revenue generated from the immobilised assets of the Central Bank of Russia to help Ukraine. These funds should contribute to the repair and reconstruction of Ukraine. Russia must also be held accountable for its human rights violations and for the illegal elections it's been holding in Ukrainian regions, as well as for the crime of waging war of aggression. Work is ongoing to establish a tribunal for the prosecution of that crime. Ukraine's future is in Europe, and we expect to consider next steps for EU enlargement negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. Progressing work on EU accession sends an important signal of hope for a brighter future to the Ukrainian people. It's also an important signal to Moldova, whose people also face destabilising activities on the part of Russia. President Putin is a dictator as well as an aggressor. I was appalled at the sudden and unexpected death of prominent Russian opposition politician and anti-corruption activist Alexei Navalny. While President Putin lives on into old age, it would appear his opponents die young. At our meeting, leaders will discuss the need for a full and transparent international investigation into the circumstances of his death. Ireland, along with our EU partners, have stated clearly that the responsibility for Mr. Navalny's death lies with Vladimir Putin. His death is a reminder of the oppressive nature of the regime that Putin presides over. The European Council will welcome new sanctions against Russia for its serious human rights violations. Security and defence issues are increasingly at the very top of the EU political agenda. Earlier this month, the European Commission published a new European Defence Industrial Strategy, along with a regulatory proposal for European Defence Industry Programme. While defence remains a national competence, these proposals aim to stimulate production and joint procurement and to allow the EU both to aid Ukraine and develop further its industrial base. For Ireland, it will be important that we engage maturely and constructively in these discussions. Our policy of military neutrality does not remove us from the global security environment or mean that we should not work closely with our fellow EU member states to overcome these challenges. We should also identify the potential benefits to Ireland of the European Commission's proposals, particularly as we increase investment in the Irish Defence Forces. There may also be scope to identify opportunities for Irish industry and research institutions. At tomorrow's meeting, leaders will consider how to strengthen the European defence technological and industrial base across the Union through better cooperation, improving access to finance, providing opportunities for SMEs and combating labour and skills shortages. Leaders will also return to the grave situation in Gaza. I'll continue to press the urgent need for an immediate ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, a massive scale-up in humanitarian assistance, and a process that can lead to a peaceful and sovereign Israel and Palestine living side by side. I was unambiguous in my recent speech in Boston that civilians in Gaza cannot be subject to collective punishment for the appalling crimes of Hamas. This is a message I brought to the White House as well, and to Congress, and to meetings with the US administration last week. And I'll reiterate it to my European partners tomorrow and on Friday. We must demand the immediate and unconditional release of hostages. The EU must be robust and consistent in underlining that international law applies in all conflicts to all parties, state actors and non-state actors alike, including Hamas and other terrorist Palestinian groups. We should continue to emphasise the importance of all parties adhering to international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians and aid workers. UNRWA alone has tragically seen more than 140 staff members killed in Gaza since October 7th, almost twice the total of all UN staff killed worldwide in 2022. This cannot be accepted or normalised in any way. UNRWA remains the essential backbone of any humanitarian response in Gaza. The decision by the European Commission to release $50 million in funding to UNRWA, with a further $32 million to follow, is very welcome. The international community must stand up for UNRWA. All those who've paused funding should resume it, and all states, including Israel, should cooperate fully with the UN investigation into allegations of involvement of a number of UNRWA staff in the 7th of October attacks in Israel. At the European Council, I will urge all our European partners who've suspended aid to UNRWA to immediately reinstate their funding. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is desperate, with famine now imminent. The European Council must urge and assist all efforts to scale up the delivery of aid by road, as well as sea and air. Crucially, Israel should not launch a ground offensive in Rafah, where over 1 million people have fled for safety and to humanitarian access to humanitarian assistance. We should also remember the situation in the rest of the occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The increase in settler violence and the construction of new settlements is alarming, and it's incumbent on the EU to combat these extremist actions. I hope that leaders will be able to agree measures to hold accountable those responsible for violent actions and innocent civilians in the West Bank. And now is the time to send a strong signal of sustained and increased political solidarity to the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people. This is important to ensure that the EU is a credible actor in any future peace process. Ireland stands ready to recognise a Palestinian state with partners when it can contribute to progress, and I expect to discuss this with like-minded partners at the margins of the meeting. or rather in the margins of the meeting. Following discussion at the Special European Council in February and the Agrifish Council on the 26th of February, leaders will take stock of the measures taken to deal with the major concerns and challenges in the agricultural sector. The European agricultural sector is under stress, and it's important we act quickly to respond to the urgent needs of our farmers and rural areas. The Green Deal and Fit for 55 package are necessary. However, there must be practical and innovative solutions to assist agriculture in rural communities and to work collaboratively with farmers. To effectively manage the issues in the sector, we must maintain our focus on an effective CAP policy which endorses sustainable food production for all our citizens, with farmers firmly at the centre. It's important that all European policies are coherent and must understand and respect the important role of farmers. Food security and affordable food for our citizens should not be taken for granted. At our meeting, leaders will take stock of preparations for the new EU Strategic Agenda 24 to 29. The strategic agenda will set out priorities for the years ahead in the areas of EU external relations, security and defence, energy challenges, our economic and social base, migration and protection and promotion of EU values. I expect that the principal discussion on this matter will take place at the Special European Council in April, alongside consideration of whether internal EU reforms are necessary, in particular to accommodate enlargement. The European Council expects to conclude work on the strategic agenda in June. In his remarks later, Minister Burke will consider the priorities for the 2024 European semester and the future of the Capital Markets Union, Euro Summit, enlargement, Bosnia and Herzegovina, migration and other foreign policy issues, and Belarus. I'll update the House again in April following this week's meeting of the European Council.
Thank you, Deputy McCarthy.
I'm not going anywhere.
And Concordia, just on a personal level, can I take the opportunity to wish the Taoiseach well following his announcement earlier. Concordia, as the European Council prepares to meet tomorrow, the people of Gaza face horrifying levels of hunger and an imminent famine. A report compiled by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification describes this chapter of an ever-escalating human catastrophe as a man-made starvation and warned that 1.1 million people, half of Gaza's population, are at grave risk. UN Secretary-General Guterres has said that over 1 million people have completely exhausted their food supplies and are facing catastrophic hunger. This is the highest number of people facing starvation anytime, anywhere in the world since the classification system was introduced over 2 decades ago. I want to quote, "People in Gaza are starving to death right now. The speed at which this man-made hunger and malnutrition crisis has ripped through Gaza is terrifying. There is a very small window left to prevent an outright famine, and to do that we need immediate and full access to the north. If we wait until famine has been declared, it is too late. Thousands more will be dead." Those, Concordia, are the harrowing words of the World Food Programme Executive Director Cindy McCain. Those words laid out in very simple and clear terms what is now at stake. Having endured 165 days of genocide, slaughter, displacement and dispossession, 165 days of witnessing their sons and daughters, mothers and fathers annihilated in their thousands, the people of Gaza now face disastrous famine and disease. UNICEF has warned that Gazan children are now dying a slow death due to hunger. For those Palestinians in Gaza that Israel hasn't managed to murder through gunfire, tank fire and air raid, it now seeks to extinguish through starvation. Israel is literally using starvation as a weapon of war. Oxfam has highlighted the cruelty of Israel's approach. They stated on Monday that Israeli forces were preventing a warehouse full of international aid from reaching starving people in Gaza. They are also blocking key aid coordinators from UNRWA from entering the Strip and to get to work to improving the humanitarian response on the ground. the catastrophic and the catastrophe of famine facing the people of Gaza underscores the need for an immediate, full and permanent ceasefire. Of course, the people of Gaza need humanitarian aid. They urgently need food, water, medical supplies and clothing. However, the only thing that will transform this horrific situation is a ceasefire and an end to the slaughter. Even as the spectre of famine stalks Gaza, Israel continued its relentless bombardment by launching airstrikes on the city of Rafah, the place where hundreds of thousands of Gazans were forcefully displaced in the wake of Israel's initial onslaught. There is nowhere left for people to flee, nowhere left to go. They are trapped, and yet Netanyahu and his regime state that they are determined to go through with a ground offensive in the city. There will be no real evacuation of these Palestinians, no protective corridors, no safe zones. The world knows, absolutely knows, what will happen to the people of Rafah should Israel launch a ground assault. There is no need for prediction or prophecy. Over the course of the last 6 months, Mr. Netanyahu and his army has shown us exactly what will happen: slaughter, destitution, genocide. What has been inflicted on the people of Gaza has been inflicted before the eyes of Europe and the world. It is atrocity layered upon atrocity, the greatest human rights violation of our time, and yet it appears worse is to come. As famine approaches, as Israel weighs up a ground invasion of Rafah, Europe must now take a stand and defend the values that it claims to cherish: human dignity, freedom and justice. Europe must lay out how it will effectively respond to treat the mass starvation in Gaza, what role it will play to stop Israel's planned invasion of Rafah, how it will help to bring this genocide to an end. Peace is the only way this can be done. Peace must now be the collective will of the international community, and the path to peace can only be forged through an immediate and full ceasefire. And Taoiseach, ministers, that will only be brought about by meaningful action. Today, the Joint Committee on Finance is discussing John Brady's illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill, a bill that contains a meaningful action to withdraw Irish taxpayers' money from investing in companies that profit from Israel's illegal settlements. We have before this House the Occupied Territories Bill, another meaningful action that could be taken. Both houses of the Oireachtas have voted calling on government to recognise the state of Palestine, a meaningful action that could be taken, none of which have been taken, despite the fact that each could be taken unilaterally by this government. The Taoiseach referenced the EU-Israel Association Agreement and his letter alongside Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain to the European Commission requesting a review of that association agreement. And essentially the answer from government is, well, we made the request and other member states have decided not to accept our premise and therefore shrug the shoulders. Europe does nothing. I think a message needs to be brought very clearly to the European Council this week. I agree with the Taoiseach's assessment in respect of Ukraine. I agree with his analysis in respect of Russia under the Putin regime. But I would contend that the greatest incentive and the greatest succour for Putin and his allies is any inclination that Europe is equivocal on adherence to international law. And the truth is that there is a stark and gross equivocation on the part of the European response to the illegal actions by Russia in Ukraine, to that of the illegal actions of Israel in Gaza. And unless there is an equivalence, unless there is a consistency, unless there is an equal application of sanctions against those regimes that engage in brutal oppression of their neighbouring states, well then I fear that the message will be lost on all bar those brutal dictators such as Putin and Netanyahu. So this is an opportunity for Europe to act. This is a time for the European Union to state very clearly whether or not it is actually on the side of human rights, of human dignity and of adherence to international law. I hope that Europe soon takes the right course, because I believe it is very much off course at the moment, and I think the European project could be enduring a long-lasting, if not permanent, damage to our credibility on these areas if that course isn't changed quickly. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Although I just left, I too would take the opportunity to wish the Taoiseach well on foot of his announcement today. I had the privilege of working in government with him, and I think everybody in this House who is called to public service approaches it to serve this nation to the best of their ability, and whatever is in the future for the Taoiseach, I wish him well. Ceann Comhairle, the ongoing horror of Gaza continues on an hourly basis in the slaughter of men, women and children. In his invitation letter to the EU leaders for tomorrow's Council meeting, President Charles Michel states that atrocities in this war have crossed the brink of inhumanity. He describes, this is the President of the Council, he describes the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and raging famine. The world, we in Europe, are not just commentators on one of the greatest humanitarian tragedies of our age. We must become active agents to bring about a halt to the killing. I commend the comments of the Taoiseach of the United States last week, coming in tandem with the remarks of Senator Chuck Schumer, a long-standing ally of Israel. I hope that they had an impact in the United States, but I fear they'll have no impact on the Netanyahu government. But this week, Europe must do more. Even the most ardent supporters of Israel know that that nation's onslaught against the entire population of Gaza is a crime against humanity that will stain Israel for generations to come. Europe must be clear and unambiguous that if the threatened assault on Rafah actually takes place, and hourly it is threatened again by the leader of the current Israeli government, Israel, if that happens, will be a pariah nation in the eyes of the civilized world. And I hope the European Council this week takes an unequivocal, clear stand and demands that no such assault happens, and demands that there is an instant call to peace and an end to hostilities. I want to make mention of security and defence, and again I refer to President Michel's invitation letter to the leaders of governments for tomorrow's Council. In the invitation letter, President Michel says, and I quote, "This is also a time for a real paradigm shift in relation to our security and defence. For decades, Europe has not invested enough in security and defence. Now that we are facing the biggest security threat since the Second World War, it is high time we take radical and concrete steps to be defence ready and put the EU's economy on a war footing." I wonder what the Taoiseach's response to that will be. As both Finland and Sweden have left our neutrals club and joined NATO, what is the Taoiseach strategy in terms of setting out Ireland's position in relation to the very clear militarisation that the rest of Europe is now engaged upon? What pressures do you expect to be exerted on us? Clearly, we have limited military capacity to be of strategic value in a purely military sense. But what is the role of neutral Ireland that will be explained to our partners by the Taoiseach? It is imperative, Cathaoirleach, that we enunciate effectively and clearly what our neutrality means.
And I'm afraid I'm not heartened by the Taoiseach's remarks today when he said, in terms of the new European Defence Industrial Strategy and a new European Defence Industry Programme, for Ireland, this I'm quoting the Taoiseach, it will be important that we engage maturely and constructively in these discussions. I'm not sure what that means, because he went on in his own remarks to say that there is opportunities for us to exploit. There may be scope to identify opportunities for Irish industry and research institutions. This is a time for clarity in relation to Ireland's role into the future, and I hope the Taoiseach will explain in very clear terms what Irish neutrality means and how it will fit in this new European agenda.
Thank you, Deputy. I return now to Government Slot and Deputy Sean Hahn.
The terrible events taking place in Gaza continues to dominate the international political agenda. It is clear that what we need now is an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the delivery of much-needed humanitarian aid to Gaza, and negotiations to commence on a long-term, sustainable two-state solution in the region. As we know, aid agencies are warning of an imminent famine in the region, affecting the entire population of Gaza. It has to be said that this was an inevitable outcome given the actions of Israel since the brutal Hamas attacks last October. The international community, including the EU and the US, have been too slow to face up to this humanitarian catastrophe. Better late than never, but at least something is now being done. As we know, the EU has been found wanting as regards this conflict and indeed in respect of other foreign policy matters. The EU Foreign Policy Chief, Joseph Borrell, continues to be a voice of reason in all of this. He has talked about how Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. Indeed, President Higgins has said something similar. The EU at least has opened up a humanitarian corridor to Gaza from Cyprus. It has decided also to allocate €50 million to UNRWA, although why it initially suspended funding to UNRWA is hard to understand. Thankfully, Canada and Sweden have now decided to resume funding of the agency. Humanitarian aid has to be got into Gaza in volume and at pace by land, sea and air. The US are planning to build a port to ship in vital aid. Jordan, with other countries, is conducting airdrops. But all this is not enough.